VeloVoices. Many voices, one passion. Pro cycling for fans by fans.
Hello and welcome to episode 6 of our VeloVoices podcast. If you are here to hear 1 hour of kitty fondue gloating, you have come to the right podcast. All right. Yep. Of course, I'm joined by Tim and Kitty in London. Tonight we're going to be covering. We're going to talk about Panne. We're going to talk about the Ronde. We're going to talk about Basque Country. We're going to talk about Scheldeprijs. We got Paris-Roubaix on the mind since that just happened this morning. We're going to review our cobbled classics squad and see how they did. And then we're actually going to pick in our Dens Classic squad, which should be interesting. And then, of course, we'll talk about what's coming up in the next couple of weeks, and then we'll end with our sprint finish. So, Tim, why don't you just briefly describe what happened at the 3 days of Panne, and then we'll move on to, of course, the Ronde.
Okay, right. 3 days of Panne. This is a nice little 3-day, 4-stage race that takes place around West Flanders as a lead up to the Ronde. Usually it visits some of the same towns en route as well. So typically we get a classic style stage and then a time trial sandwiching a pair of sprints. So there's a little something for everyone. This year's race was a bit like one of those games of Spot the Difference compared with the 2012 edition. So last year the individual stages were won by Peter Sagan, Marcel Kittel, Alexander Kristoff and Sylvain Chavanel, with Chavanel taking the overall. This year, we had a Peter Sagan strongman show on stage 1, followed by a tough headwind sprint win for Mark Cavendish. The second sprint stage was won by Kristoff, and then Chavanel won the time trial to make it back-to-back overall victories. So, spot the difference? Basically, the only difference this year was that it was Cav rather than Kittel who won stage 2. All the other stage winners the same as last year, and the same overall winner. Good race, though.
Right, and this turns out to be the only classics race that Quick Step wins this season. So maybe we'll talk a little bit about that later. But I think that's pretty interesting, and I'm glad it was Chavanel because obviously he has had such good results in all of the classics this year. He's been the kind of star of the show, right, for Quick Step. So congratulations to Sylvain Chavanel. And if you like saying Sylvain Chavanel, call Kathy because she loves hearing his name being spoken.
And I'd love saying it as well.
As well as Szechuan, and what was the other word, Kathy?
Oh, God, I can't remember that.
Oh, Azerbaijan.
Oh, Azerbaijan. Yeah, that.
All right. All right, so that brings us then to my favorite race of the year. But arguably, Paris-Roubaix today might be my favorite of this season because it was awesome. But anyway, we come to the Ronde. And Kathy was actually there. She was there in Bruges, so we're going to hear a little bit about that. But before we hear about Kathy's experience, Tim, why don't you just give us a little bit of an overview of how the race unfolded and what happened?
Yeah, let me just give Kathy a quick break while she goes off to recruit Chavanel to Team Fondue.
Right.
The Ronde. Oh, it seems like a long time ago now, doesn't it? This was a race where the tables were turned in more ways than one. So last year we had Tom Boonen taking an imperious victory after Fabian Cancellara crashed. This year, though, it was Boonen's turn to crash out while Cancellara won all on his lonesome by more than a minute. Radio Shack and Spartacus also turned the tables on Cannondale and Sagan. At Strada Bianchi, Cannondale had bossed the race, really, physically and tactically, and Radio Shack had looked more like Radio Slack.
Right.
But both there and at San Marino, Cancellara was essentially manoeuvred into a position that he didn't want to be in, that ultimately cost him any hope of victory. At Flanders, though, it was Radio Shack who drove the peloton, putting Cancellara in the box seat and putting everyone else on the back foot. As for the race itself, it was a pretty quiet first couple of 100 kilometres. We had, of all people, Andre Greipel instigating a big attack at half distance that shaped the rest of the race. Radio Shack rose to that challenge. They pegged the gap back to the point where really it was never going to be an issue. The pace then gradually ramped up on the first and the second of the 3 closing circuits, which require the riders to get over both the Quaremont and the shorter but sharper Paterberg. With the new routes that was introduced last year, it seems that the parkour is really now much more attritional and much less explosive, with everyone really gritting their teeth and clinging on for the final lap. So the last time up the Quaremont, everyone else went pop, as Cancellara dragged a by now labouring Sagan and linked up with Jürgen Roelandts. Spartacus very nearly snaps the elastic at that point, but he was patient. He reloaded, and then he waited until the final 100 metres or so of the Paterberg, until Roelandts had dropped off and completely isolated Sagan. And then off he went. He pulled out a gap of maybe 15-20 metres over the summit, went into time trial mode, and that was the last anyone saw of him. It was genuinely a beautiful ride. Perfect team tactics by Radio Shack, topped off by a perfectly timed individual move. So victory for Cancellara. Sagan took second, ahead of an exhausted Roelandts, as the pair held off just about what remained of the contenders group, and then Sagan made what can only really be described as a complete ass of himself, which I guess we'll come back to a little bit later.
Yeah. I was really impressed by the way that Lotto rode that race, though. I mean, to put their guys where they put them was tactically brilliant, and to get Roland's just in that finale was fascinating. You can't say enough about how Cancellara kind of rides away. So Kathy, you were actually there. I mean, what's it like to go to the Tour of Flanders?
Well, it was a race that I've never been to before. I mean, I go to the end of the Tour de France every year, and I've seen a few other stages of the Tour. But, I love the classics so much, and I love Bruges. If anybody has not been to Bruges, they need to go, because it is one of the most beautiful little cities in the world. And I was going to go, and then I wasn't going to go, and then on the Friday I just thought, what am I doing? I've got to go. So whenever I go to races, the thing is, you never know what's going on in the race if you're there. Right. And I actually wanted to tweet the race because I knew Cancellara was going to win. So I thought, okay, well, what do I want to do? And basically, what I always try to do when I go to these races is see something that I can't possibly see better on TV, if you know what I mean. Yeah. Or something that I can't see at all, which would be like the sign in when the guys are coming up, or if it's, the finish and you're around the buses or something. So I just went to the market square on Sunday morning really early, and it was freezing. And there were, the crowds are really interesting. If you like people watching, you can't get any better than a cycling crowd in Flanders. Because there were like little kids, there were old women. I mean, like in their 70s or 80s. I'm thinking I'm going to be that person. Far, far in the future. Yeah. And so I just went for the sign in and for the start off. And I was within arm's reach of Cancellara. However, I did not pinch his bottom. And I just, I took lots of pictures of guys coming up, but as soon as I saw him, I just put the camera down, because another thing that I'm really big on is seeing the race with your own eyes when you're there, because everybody sees stuff through a screen. Yeah. And so if you've got a digital camera, you're looking at the screen, and so therefore you're still a step away from them, and I just wanted to see him and just see him. So
so he's seared into your memory. And how do the haunches look in real life?
Oh my God. They are sacred haunches, I can tell you. He is so much bigger than most of those guys. I mean, it's really quite amazing that, he is just, he's a big guy. Yeah. So that was my experience. And then I went, because I had a couple hours before they had the live feed, and I went into the Speckaloos shop, because I have a thing about Speckaloos, and I was buying a cookbook, and the woman who was behind the counter had taken a call from her husband, and in Flemish, all I heard was "Boonen" and then a gasp, and so I'm like, what happened? Oh, and so she's like, oh, he's crashed out. I'm like, but they've just started. So what I really love also about, when the race is in town is you can talk to anybody about cycling and they'll know what you're talking about.
Yeah, the Belgians love their cyclists. They just love them like they're saints. So, Tim, you had mentioned how brilliant Radio Shack was, and I was just really impressed with the rides of like Hayden Ralston and Stint de Volder. I mean, those guys just chased down everything. It was just like a different Radio Shack team than we've ever seen this season. Any thoughts on those guys?
Yeah, I think both those guys you named, and in fact, really the entire team did a fantastic job for Cancellara. And it's in stark contrast, really, to some of the troubles that Mark Cavendish has been having at Omega Pharma, where there's the suspicion that maybe not all of them are pulling for him in quite the same way. But Radio Shack have been a team transformed over the last month. They've been committed, they've been powerful, they've done a fantastic job of putting other teams completely on the back foot and of controlling the gap. I think I mentioned just in my brief recap that although Lotto and a number of other teams threw absolutely everything tactically at them, they kept on top of the front of the peloton. They made sure the gap was never more than about a minute or so, and it just never became a factor. Unlike at Strade Bianche, where almost foremost in Cancellara's mind was not just trying to get rid of Sagan and the others who were with him, but catching up to the lead group who was ahead of him. So I can't really speak highly enough of the job that those guys did.
Yeah. Now, you also mentioned the new race route. We saw it last year. We see it again this year, where they do that circuit 3 times around, and they hit the Quermont and the Paterberg, and it kind of becomes a race of attrition, and then whoever's there on those last 2 hills is really the selection. I don't like it.
Neither do I.
I think I miss the Muir. It just seems like the other race was more select in that people could attack earlier because they knew that hard stuff wasn't coming. So you could have like a Chavanel try to go off the front and make something happen, and it could become a little bit more unpredictable. I wonder if they'll change it back, or if this is kind of the Ronda that we're going to see from now on. I'm hoping that they'll change it back, but I know that a lot of people kind of vented frustration on Twitter, and I'm wondering if the race organizers heard that. Okay, so then obviously we mentioned the podium and Sagan taking a pinch at the podium hostess's bottom. Kathy, I'm going to ask you. What's our final word on that?
Well, that's just. Do you know what? You just don't touch people provocatively if you don't know them. I mean, I don't know what he was doing. I know that he was trying to be funny. I don't think he meant anything really, sort of sinister by that. But, for heaven's sake, keep your hands to yourself. That is so unprofessional, not to mention it then just took all the glory away from Spartacus. But, I mean, still, it was disrespectful to Cancellara as well, because that was his moment to shine, and that's all anybody talks about now is the Sagan thing. I mean, he's had a bit of form before, and I think that the apology that he posted on Facebook, Cannondale must have sat him down and said, listen, you cut this stuff out or else, because he did sound, quite, remorseful. And then the podium girl tweeted that she accepted the apology. She never wanted it to happen again. She was just trying to do her job.
Yeah.
And so I think, if she accepts it, we do.
Yeah, and I think, overall for me, it is a reflection about how professional cycling views women in general. I mean, if you look at people's different tweets about this, where some were saying, well, the podium girl asked for it. I mean, that's just...
Well, that's just crap.
I know. When I hear stuff like that and see stuff like that, I'm just so frustrated. But, subtly it leaks into the rest of racing as well. I mean, we had a fantastic women's Flanders race, right? Where Boss the Vos, as Tim would call her, wins Flanders in glorious fashion. It's timed differently from the men's race. So, and there were cameras there. Why couldn't they show some of that? We were all interested in that. When we heard that Voss won, we were all like, Voss wins, but we didn't get to see any of it. So I think cycling in general has quite a bit of work to do. They have quite a distance to travel to really give women the spotlight that they deserve. All right, well, we'll leave that there. It was a great race, and I'm glad that you got to go, Kathy. I'm glad that your man won. I mean, what a memory that you have. All right, and we're going to come back to Belgium in just a little bit because obviously we're going to talk about Paris-Roubaix, and I'm sure we're going to talk about Fabian. But let's travel down to Spain, where you would think the weather would be better than in Belgium, but it wasn't. And we're going to talk about the Tour of the Basque Country. And I'm just going to cover this really quickly. It's a week-long stage race, and it's a great race. Cherie actually went down, and hopefully we'll hear some audio interviews from her in the next couple of weeks. But stage one, near the top of the final climb, with about 8 kilometers to go, there was a crash, and there was a big split, and there was a lead group of about 20 riders, and out of there, Simon Gerrans wins the sprint. And so it was an interesting time to see what his form is doing, especially coming into the Ardennes. Stage 2 was great too because it was also won by his teammate. So Green Edge goes back-to-back 1-2 with Daryl Impey winning the sprint. I thought it was Matthews who won the sprint when I was actually tweeting, but it was Gerrans and Matthews who led out Daryl Impey for the win, and it was a well-organized sprint train from Green Edge to take that win. In both the first 2 stages and in the third stage, Amets Charuka got in the break every time. So this guy was getting camera time the entire time, and he ends up taking the Mountains jersey. But what great riding by him, and it was interesting to see Jens Voigt call him out as being a hero on Twitter. But anyway, that stage 3 had what I would think is one of the most exciting finishes of the entire year, with 2 Colombians, Henao from Sky and Bentancur from AG2R, basically going shoulder to shoulder at the line on this steep climb. I think there was 21% grade at the top of that thing. And basically it was a bike throw that determined the winner. So that was brilliant. And then we go into stage 4 where the weather again turns completely miserable. And we have Quintana from Movistar win the stage, with Henao finishing close to second, and then Alberto Contador actually finishing third. And Quintana trimmed his time down so that he's only trailing Henao by 6 seconds. Henao is in yellow. So going into 5 and 6, we have Sky doing a lot of work on the front of the peloton, and our guy that we talked about a little bit earlier or last time, Richie Porte, at the very end shows that he's still in good form, and he basically attacks at the end and wins with his teammate Henao third. And then Alberto Contador actually ended up sitting 4th in the GC by 10 seconds. So I thought in stage 6, in this final time trial, we were going to see a battle between Alberto Contador and Richie Porte in the time trial. And what was the weather like on stage 6, Kathy? Miserable.
It was cold and it was wet.
Yeah, it was super wet, and that was a pretty technical time trial. Well, I was surprised to see Quintana actually win the overall GC over Richie Porte and Alberto Contador. So congratulations to Team Movistar for winning that. Tony Martin won the stage in that miserable weather, and it was nice to see his time trial form being exactly what we expect. But Contador lost over a minute to him on that course, and I was really surprised by that. But
isn't he still just trying to get over flu or something, Contador?
Yeah, I guess, but he had shown such good form in the first 5 days doing these climbing. I think he was a little bit risk averse with that weather.
Yeah, because there were a lot of he looked like he was going through those corners really, really gingerly, I believe is the word you'd use. So he never seemed to really have that kind of rhythm that he usually does.
Yeah. So Quintana gets I think it's pronounced Zapella, and that's the big black floppy hat.
Yay!
Which for me is the third best trophy after the Trident and the Pave Stone from Roubaix. So congratulations to Movistar. Of course, it's a Spanish team, and they win, arguably one of the, other than the Vuelta, one of the best races in Spain. So there weren't any big climbs, but what did we think of the parcours, Tim?
I really like this race. I think it's a great example of a race where you can build stages that have a lot of moderate or moderately long climbs that have very steep gradients, like we saw on the third stage, that really, really sort the riders out. It's a great test of a rider's ability to climb, also a rider's ability to descend.
Yeah.
And I think throughout that, I don't think there wasn't a dull stage in the entire race.
Yeah, there really wasn't. And that stage 3 finish at the end, that climb was so strange because it wasn't, this long gradated thing where guys could get into the rhythm. The gradient changed like schizophrenically up that hill, so no guys could ever really kind of find their niche there. So I think we're going to see that finish in the Vuelta at some point. And now, what about all these Colombians, Tim? We had Henao, Quintana, and Bentancur. Is this the new Colombian revolution? Are we going to see these guys rip up the Grand Tours?
There are some fantastic Colombian climbers. I guess you'd almost extend it out and say there are some fantastic South American climbers out there. I know Cherie often refers to them as the must-have accessory for the Grand Tours because there's a combination of Sergio Henao at Sky is a fairly explosive climber, as is Carlos Betancur. Someone like Rigoberto Urán maybe is a little bit better suited to the kind of the longer, grind it out type climbs of the Grand Tours. But there is some fantastic talent out there. There's and it takes a race like the Basque Country, or perhaps something like the Giro del Trentino that's coming up, to really bring the best out of these guys. But there are some fantastic cyclists there.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to just tackle one thing here. Oliver McCarthy from Twitter asked, send us a sprint finish question, but I'm actually going to address it right now, and that was about, what about Richie Porte? Here's another race where he shows fantastic form and that he could be a team leader. And the question that Oliver was asking, we covered this a bit last time, was is he, too much of a leader to stay on Sky? Is he going to end up going somewhere else? And I think my answer to that is no. I think he's going to stay at Sky. And I think the reason he's going to stay at Sky is because he hasn't proven himself as a 3-week Grand Tour guy yet. And I think that Sky has done a great job this season of divvying out the riches to various riders. It's not like, any of their big GC guys, Wiggins or anybody like this, was at this race to do their thing. It was about Porte. And so good for Sky for kind of letting different guys win at different times. Now, we'll see during the Grand Tours if guys like Henao and Richie Porte have what it takes to be a GC guy over 3 weeks. But we've seen, different teams like Levi Leipheimer, for example. Here's a guy who is brilliant at 1-week stage racing, but always comes a little bit short when it comes to 3-week stage racing. Or Tony Martin. We've talked about him too, right, Tim? He's a brilliant time trialist. He's great in a 1-week race, but what is he capable of in a 3-week race? And it's probably not the same as Wiggins. So we'll see. That's my answer for Porte. We'll see, coming this year in the Grand Tours if Porte has the kind of form over 3 weeks that he can manage over 1 week. All right. Now let us go back to Belgium and talk about Scheldeprijs, which is one of the boringest races I've ever watched. But it always has, the last 15 minutes are some of the most exciting racing that you'll ever see. So Tim, just quickly run us through what happened at Scheldeprijs.
One of the most boring races you've ever seen. I don't think it was that interesting. Certainly not until the last 10 minutes.
Yeah.
This is very much a sprinter's race. 204 kilometres this year of billiard table flatness from Antwerp to Schotten. So no great surprise that many of the big name sprinters came out to play. And ultimately, despite the usual breakaways and an early crash for Fabian Cancellara, not really sure what he was doing there, but anyway, this came down to a chaotic bunch sprint. Gotta say, the Argonauts did a great job piloting last year's winner Marcel Kittel into position, and he duly finished the job off with a strong and well-timed kick. Meanwhile, Omega Pharma made a real hash of their finish, burning matches too early and leaving Mark Cavendish with way too much to do on his own. Even so, I looked at the replay of the finish closely, and Cav came from more than 20 places and a good 8 or 9 bike lengths back with 200 metres to go, and he was just half a wheel behind Kittel by the line. Another 10 metres, and he'd probably have caught him. So, second though, I guess, a disappointment for the 3 times winner, who was seeking both a record 4th victory and also a first birthday present for his daughter Delilah, who was there at the finish, but some things aren't meant to be. And I guess I should also just give a quick shout out to Vacon Soleil's Barry Marcus, who is still just 21, but he took an impressive third place. Although he did cut across a not very happy Teo Boss quite sharply in the last 50 metres or so. I think he's definitely one to watch for the future. He finished second behind Cav a couple of times in Qatar. He had some decent finishes in the Tour Down Under too. So, like I say, he's only 21, but he's a quick, strong guy who I think's got a really bright future.
Yeah. The Argonauts did a great job, and it was, I love seeing a team like that win because they are just so happy at the end. I mean, you see all those guys huddled together. They're all patting each other on the back. What a great win. And it's interesting to hear Patrick Lefevere's reaction to his Quick Step squad over the course of this Classics campaign. He is not happy with what's going on at Quick Step this season. So.
Yeah, he didn't pull any punches, did he, with what he said?
No, he did not. And so, with Boonen being out and being injured, I know it makes it rough for that team, but they have so many rock stars, right, on paper. And so I think he's got a right to be disappointed this season. And, of course, Cavendish at the end did not want to be on camera. He did not want to be interviewed. But I thought, for the most part, he maintained his composure, and he was pretty full of class. So, all right. Now, of course, we have to talk about what happened today at the Queen of the Classics, the Hell of the North, Paris-Roubaix. And Kathy...
Yes.
As this is your favorite race of the season, and
it is.
As your man, Fabian Cancellara, today earned his third pave, enough stones to build his own little sector in his backyard, so to speak. Tell us about the race that was Paris-Roubaix.
Okay, being as it's still quite fresh in everyone's mind, I'm just going to kind of go through the points that really stood out for me. The first one was that the race started out really quickly in really crystal clear conditions. I mean, it was a beautiful day, so the dust was kicking up. It was cold. Cancellara had his arm warmers on the whole race. But, the weather wasn't playing that big a part in it as it had in the earlier classics. But it started out with a 13-man breakaway, which had both Radio Shack and Omega Pharma riders in it. So Radio Shack, right off the bat, didn't have to chase. And being as Cancellara was the favourite, everybody expected him to just be marked to within an inch of his life, and that all the teams would make Radio Shack chase. And that never seemed to happen in this race, which is probably why he won. But so we get to the forest of Ehrenberg. We've got about 4 guys out, O'Grady, Steegmans, Heyman, and Koretsky. And Andre Greipel, again, goes out into no man's land to try to catch this break before they hit the forest of Ehrenberg. But unfortunately, he didn't get there. But I just love the fact that he did it.
Yeah, he was like a tank today, man. That guy is just zooming. It was great.
Exactly. So the break of 4 hits the forest first, and then Taylor Finney, who was tipped as a contender for the podium place. Everybody had high hopes for him today.
Yeah.
He rode really strongly and just started to shut them down as soon as they hit the cobbles.
Yeah.
He wasn't supposed to be the team leader. The team leader was Thor Hushovd, who seemed to have every mechanical under the sun. So, that was that.
Yeah, every time they showed Thor, he was like back at the cars.
Yeah.
And then he was like trying to chase back in, right?
Exactly.
But he was still in that front group towards the end. But I don't want to steal the thunder, so go ahead. Sorry.
So the one thing that did happen in Ehrenberg was that Geraint Thomas found himself in the mud. Now, Geraint Thomas has fallen in pretty much every race he's raced this year, and I think he's starting to get a little bit of a Dennis Menshoff thing going on, where you just randomly fall. So they come out of the Ehrenberg, and it didn't quite split the race as much as everyone thought. But pretty much from then on, it was little attacks off the front of the peloton, Radio Shack was keeping it really controlled. Cancellara never had to chase down stuff. You know, his team did that, or other teams did that. Europe Car was on the front quite a lot.
Yeah.
So he was keeping well in the pack, really safe, you know, conserving his energy, because it's all about energy. So we had loads of little breakaways until coming up to Sector 11, Cancellara just decides, right, this is it. And he splinters the peloton by just ramping up the pace on the front of the peloton. By Sector 10, all of the break was caught. And there was a group of 13 riders that formed, which included Cancellara, Chavanel, Van Mark, Paulini, Eisel, Vandenberg, Heinrich Hausler. I mean, you know, big names.
All the contenders were there.
Exactly. Yeah. Van Avermaet. Who wasn't there was Taylor Phinney. Or Geraint Thomas or Thor Hushovd. Yeah. But so then it kind of broke up into three little groups. And at about that time, Cancellara was in the third group chasing the other two. And at this point, he goes back to the team car, and it looked as though he might be in trouble. He was wincing a little bit. He was having a bit of a chat. And so everybody's like, oh my God, Cancellara's dude, that's it. He's cooked. He's done. And then he just put the pedal to the metal and just bridged right up to the front group. By that time, Vandenberg and Van Mark had gone off on their own. So then Cancellara puts an attack in at about 22 kilometers to go. And only Stuyber could actually hold his wheel. And so they caught the two Belgians just ahead of Sector 5.
The two vans.
The two vans, yes. Ahead of Sector 5. And this is where it gets really bizarre for me, because in other races, the break would have been happy to have Cancellara on the front and drag them to the line. They wouldn't have helped him in any way, shape, or form. But again, they all seem to be quite happy to take their turn. In fact, Cancellara was the one that wasn't doing many turns.
Right.
So I'm starting to think he has Jedi mind games or something. I don't know what was going on today. But he was being really patient, and he wasn't thinking, oh man, I've just got to drive this to the line. So then Paris-Roubaix is all about luck. And Vandenberg and Stuyber didn't have it in this sector because both of them hit fans that had sort of strayed too close to the side of the cobbles. Vandenberg went first, and he went down hard. Stuyber, only a couple of seconds later, was careering across the cobbles, you know, legs akimbo, but he never went down. But that was it. He, you know, the other two were off. Nobody could catch him.
Stuyber has the most amazing bike handling. I mean, that cyclocross experience has served him well today, because any other rider would have went down.
Oh, God, and into the crowd and everything.
Yeah, that was amazing.
So then it's just Cancellara and Van Mark, and both of them were starting to look a bit tired, I've got to say.
Yeah.
And at this point, smart money would have been on Van Mark if Cancellara had stayed with him to win in a sprint. But again, Cancellara, instead of just powering away, I mean, he did try to make a little dig, but Van Mark stayed with them. So Van Mark again kept doing his turn, which I just thought was just the most bizarre thing. Until they get to the velodrome, and it was there that, I mean, they almost came to a track stop because Cancellara was not going to go in front. And this is where his brute force took over, because I think he just intimidated the hell out of him and just wouldn't and just made Van Mark go first. And then at the right point, he just blew past him and won his third Paris-Roubaix. And I was shaking by the end of it, because you just didn't know what was going to go on. And you know, if Van Mark had won, it would have been a brilliant race for him to win. I mean, really, seriously. As much as I love Cancellara, anybody that wins that race deserves to win that race. And Van Mark would have. I mean, at the end of it, Cancellara, you know, basically fell off his bike. Right. And then poor Van Mark just sat on his bike and cried, which I just thought was just quite tragic. And Nicky Terpstra was third.
Yeah, Sepp Van Mark. Let me talk about him a little bit. He raced a brilliant race today, and to be honest, to take Fabian Cancellara into the velodrome and sprint it out. Yeah, that's basically the best scenario that he could have hoped for at that. With 5 kilometers to go, it's like, okay, I'm going to go into the velodrome and I'm going to out sprint Fabian. That's how we'll work this. And so it's not going to be long before he wins either this race or a race like it, because he showed today that he has got it. He has really got it. And I know that Jonathan Vaughters is just dying that he is not on Garmin anymore. Mm. And then, Tim, what about Steibar? I mean, I think if it would have been the 3 of those guys going into the velodrome, who do you think wins?
Yeah, it would have been interesting, wouldn't it? And I think in Vandenberg's case, I think sorry, not Vandenberg. In Van Mark's case, I think there was an element of he was so tired,
right?
That as you say, that the best scenario for him was to take it into the velodrome and hope for the best. And I think that's why we saw him take the lead in both sectors 2 and 1 at the end, because I think he was worried that if he lets Cancellara go in front, that would be it.
Yeah,
and he'd never see him again. Steibar, he was impressive. A couple of times when Cancellara kicked, he was on his wheel, and he was on his wheel fast. He looked strong. He was quick. He certainly made Cancellara's life as difficult as anyone could possibly have made it. And he's a very, very strong guy.
Yeah, I think if they go into the velodrome, the 3 of them, that Steibar would have won it. I think he would have outsprinted both Van Mark and Fabian. So,
and speaking of crashes, what about Johan Alfredo?
Oh my gosh, hitting that road furniture. That was. I'm just. I was so glad though to see him instantly get up and putting gauze on his chin, because that crash could have been way worse. Yeah. That's the kind of crash that can just leave a guy basically headless. So. Well, anyway, let's not end on that. Fabian, what a season, to after last year to crash out and not be able to do any of these races, and to watch Boonen go and win them, and then for Cancellara, and I was one of these guys, you could just go listen 3 podcasts ago, I didn't pick Cancellara for our classics team.
Guess who did?
I know. I had thought that these teams had figured him out, but that man... Spartacus was crafty. He was just super crafty in both Flanders and Roubaix, and that's what got him the win. And to build 2 bridges, I mean, that's what he did today. He bridged twice, and then to go win the sprint. I mean, that's the stuff of legend. Let's be honest. So, congratulations to Fabian Cancellara, and congratulations to the Radio Shack team for arguably the most successful classics team this season.
Absolutely.
So. And what about Team Sky, Tim?
I really want to know what it is that Sky did on this classics training camp in Tenerife, because I have a feeling
they drank.
I have a feeling that Geraint Thomas's training plan involved walking repeatedly under a ladder while kicking black cats. Because how unlucky is this guy?
He fell like 3 or 4 times in this race. I mean, every time they'd show somebody on the ground, Geraint Thomas was around there somewhere, either in a ditch or just picking himself back up. It was a shocker.
I felt it was terrible for him.
It was, and he went down last Sunday in the Ronda, and he went in Milan San Remo. I think it was at the very bottom of the Cipressa where he went down, which is just about the worst possible place for a crash.
And I don't know what happened. I mean, I haven't seen a tweet from Taylor Phinney. I'm not sure what happened. He looked so strong coming out of Arenberg, and I wondered, well, what happened to him? Did he have a mechanical or?
I did see a quote from him saying something about that he felt really strong, and in a way that was almost, he felt too strong, so he got too excited, particularly when he went into the Arenberg, and so then he just overextended himself too quickly.
Yeah, I'm thinking maybe he thought that if he did the work in Arenberg, that the peloton would be a lot thinner coming out. But to think about it, they plowed that one side of Arenberg, which I wish they wouldn't do that, because I love to see the guys riding in the dirt and on the cobbles. So don't do that again. But when they turned out of Arenberg, I was like, holy cow, this is a huge group still.
Yeah. It didn't do anything that it was supposed to do. And
like you said, Kathy, almost all the favorites were still in it.
Yeah.
I mean, even Ian Stannard, who'd had a flat at the beginning, was coming out of Arenberg like with that front group. So, okay. Well, we don't want to take more than an hour and a half for this podcast, so let's move on. Let's just check in on our classics team really quick. Remember, if you go back 2 podcasts ago, we picked the team that we thought would win Milan-San Remo, the Tour of Flanders, and Paris-Roubaix. And our team picks were Peter Sagan. And so, Tim, Peter Sagan, what was his record during the classics here?
Let's see. So he was second at Milan-San Remo. He was second at Harelbeke. Won Gent-Wevelgem, obviously, and then he was second, obviously, again last week, and as a result of not winning the Ronde, he lost a bet that meant that he didn't start Paris-Roubaix today. But a first and 3 seconds, not bad.
Yeah, I think that he gets a gold star, obviously, for our classics team. Then of course we picked Matt Goss, who didn't finish any race. So Matt Goss has to arguably be our worst pick of our team, I would say. And I was the guy who really put Matt Goss on our team because I thought that at Milan-San Remo he would do better than he did. Unfortunately, the weather didn't agree with that. Okay, and then Kathy, what about Sylvain Chavanel?
Well, Chavanel, we thought was going to, be up on the podium for most of these, whether he'd won it or not. But he wasn't. He was 4th in Milan-San Remo, where he caught a cold. He was 6th in Harelbeke, if that's how you say it. And he was 19th in Paris-Roubaix today. He, unfortunately, was up in that big chase group of Cancellara near the end. And then he punctured. But, so that was it. He never came back after that.
Yeah, he was
I was very disappointed that Chavanel didn't do better.
Yeah, in all the races, he was kind of a protagonist. I think he's still a solid pick for our team, but again, he just hasn't figured out, or luck, or I don't know what it is. But I think Quick Step overall has been cursed the entire classics. So, all right, Greg van Avermaet. I'm going to say that he's another gold star pick, and here's why. He was 36 at Milan-San Remo. Right, and then he was 24th at E3, and then he was 3rd at Gent-Wevelgem, and then he was 4th. He was nearly on the podium today in that sprint with Nicky Terpstra. So he pretty much got better as the classics went on.
Yeah,
and so I think Van Avermaet, he was a good pick for us. He was a gold star. Obviously, it goes without saying that Fabian Cancellara was our best pick for our classic squad. So he gets the triple gold star, if you will. Tom Bonin.
And a Team Fondue jersey.
And a Team Fondue jersey. All right. Tom Bonin. Tim, what do you think?
Yeah, okay. Move on.
Right. He's part of that. He's part of that cursing of Quick Step, right?
Yeah. The classic season couldn't have gone any worse for him, really, could it?
Yeah.
No.
And he leaves, his prize for being on our team is a broken rib.
Oh.
Yeah. What did he manage? He managed 7th at Harelbeke, didn't finish San Remo, didn't finish Gent-Wevelgem, didn't finish the Ronde, and obviously didn't start today as a result of his crash last weekend. So, yeah, get well soon, Tom, and I'm sure he'll be looking to forget the 2013 spring season as quickly as possible.
Yeah. And, I would say with our 2 domestiques that we picked 2 solid domestiques in Taylor Phinney and Bernie Eisel. Taylor was 7th at Milan-San Remo and had a ridiculously great ride. He was 41st at Gent-Wevelgem, and he was 23rd at Flanders, he was 23rd at Roubaix. So, I think he's probably a little disappointed about what happened today at Roubaix, but he's super young, and I think he's, these races are only giving him experience that will serve him well in the future. And so we have not, obviously we have not seen the last of him in the classics, and I would imagine that when we do this next year, that
we'll be talking about him a lot more.
Yeah, he won't be one of our domestique picks, probably. No. He'll probably be one of our main picks. And then, of course, Bernie was just solid throughout. He was 10th at Milan-San Remo, and then he was actually 12th today at Paris-Roubaix. He was in that 3rd chase group. And, the commenters were saying, hey, don't let that guy make the front group, because if he does, he's going to slaughter everybody. So
Plus,
good.
With Eisel, he was the one off Sky that kept getting the in the breaks that were going away, whereas all the other ones were not.
Yeah, and Kathy, that's why you picked him. You said it. You're like, this guy knows how to read races, and that proved to be exactly true. So I would say of the 8 guys that we picked, of the guys that we picked, I think 5 of them were solid, and we actually picked the winner of 2 of the races. So that's not bad. All right, which leads us to our next thing on the agenda, which is the time where we're going to actually pick 8 guys that we think can win the Ardennes Classics. And Tim, tell us about the 3 races that we're looking at here.
So we've got the 3 races that come in the space of 8 days.
Yes.
And they're all super hilly. There's some legendary climbs that have to be tackled. Amstel Gold has 32 hills, and obviously you've got the Coburg at the end of it. Mm-hmm. You've got Flèche Wallonne, which has the Mur de Huy, which tops out at 26% on its steepest sections. And then just a host of climbs in Liège-Bastogne-Liège. So, 3 races that are very much built for the really strong, powerful, punchy climbers.
Yeah, I mean, when you hear the word puncheur, this is what you think of, right? It's usually, they're not big guys, because these hills some of them are like 5 kilometers long and steep. So you got to kind of be small. You can't be a Taylor Phinney and win. You're not going to be a Taylor Phinney or a Stein Vandenberg and win one of these races. But you could be a guy, like Philippe Gilbert, who's won a gazillion times at these races, or even a guy like Frank Schleck, right? Kind of wispy, but thin enough and light enough to get up to these climbs, and occasionally, and I'm saying this about a Schleck, tough enough to get to the top of these climbs. So that's the type of rider that we're looking for in these races. So Kathy, we're going to start with you, and I'm going to ask you to pick 2 riders that you think can win these 3 races.
Well, that's a good question, because I don't think I'm prepared for this. But I'm going to say Philippe Gilbert, obviously, and Omega Pharma's Kais.
Ooh, okay.
Don't ask me why. I've just thrown it out there.
Wow. Okay, so let's talk about Gilbert first. He's a Walloon, so he's from this part of Belgium. This is like these are his home roads. And he won all 3 of these races in 2011, which I don't know if anybody's ever done that. I think he might be one of the only guys to ever win all 3 of them in a row, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think David Rebellin is the only other one, certainly in modern times.
Right. So he's a great pick. I think I would say that he would probably be on everyone's list to be a favorite, and he's obviously structured his season to win these races. At least that's what he said.
Yeah.
I don't know about Kaiser.
Like I said, I just, you know what? I almost pulled it out of a hat because, to be honest, I'm not really prepared for the Ardennes yet. I'm still trying to get over the cobbles.
All right. So, Tim, we'll see if Kaiser stays on the list. But
okay.
Tim, can you and I both agree that Philippe Gilbert is going to be one of the guys on our 8-man team?
Yeah, I think I can go for that.
All right. Okay, so Tim, what do you got?
I was umming and ahhing over Gilbert, simply because I'm not entirely convinced that he's been sandbagging. I'm a little bit concerned about his form, but I've got 2 others that I'd certainly be confident about putting in. First of which would be Joaquim Rodriguez, winner of Flèche Wallonne last year, and here's a guy who he's been. When you talk about a puncher, he's very much one of the first names you think of. He's done well at each of these 3 races. He's finished second in each of these 3 races at least once before. As I said, he won Flèche Wallonne last year. He knows he can He can get to the top of a climb in a select group and out-sprint his rivals as well. And he's definitely shown so far this season that he's in good nick. So I'd be pretty confident about him achieving at least one decent result in these 3 races.
Okay.
So he'd be my first pick. And then the second one, I'm not entirely sure what his programme is for April. But if he does race the Ardennes Classics, I'd really love to see Vincenzo Nibali win one at last. Mm-hmm. And again, last year he was ever so close in the classics. He performed well at Milan-San Remo, and then he came to the Ardennes. He was third at Flèche Wallonne. He was second in Liège, and I think we probably all remember that finish when he went out solo and was caught barely a kilometre from the line by
Iglinski.
Iglinski,
Yeah.
That's right, Asana Iglinski. And if he's in the race, he will for sure have a go at some point. So he will be an animator.
Yeah, and I think he also showed us at Torino that he's one of the toughest men in the peloton. I mean, for a small climber type guy, I don't know if there's anybody tougher than Vincenzo Nibali. So I agree with you. I think Vincenzo Nibali is definitely going to be on our team. And Kathy, were you okay with J-Rod? Because I know you love J-Rod.
I love him. That's absolutely fine with me.
Okay, so far we have Philippe Gilbert, Joaquim Rodriguez, and Vincenzo Nibali on our team. And so, okay, and we have Elo Kaiser. So I think we're going to end up kicking him off here in just a second. But we'll see. Okay.
Just wait, and then he'll win. And then I'll say, see, I told you.
All right, so I'm going to name 2 guys, and you guys can either approve or, we can kick these 2 guys off too. But I'm going to pick Alejandro Valverde. He's been kind of quiet this year so far, but he is a guy who's actually won Flèche Wallonne and Liège-Bastogne-Liège in the same year in 2006. And I think his program is meant to win these races this year. So I think we're going to see Valverde do, some wonderful things here. So he's one for me. This is a one that might surprise you. I'm actually going to pick Jonathan Tiernan-Locke for our team. JTL has what it takes to win on these parcours, and rumor is that he's been building up for this. These short, punchy climbs in these Belgian hills are ideal for his racing style, and at 5'8", with these tree trunk legs, he's built for these short, intense efforts, and I think he's really hoping to post some stellar results in the Ardennes. So, Tim, with that, what do you think about the inclusion of Valverde and Tiernan-Locke in our team?
I think it's hard to argue against Valverde. I think he has proven pedigree in these sorts of races. Tiernan-Locke is a really interesting choice. I've seen him the last 2 years at the Tour of Britain, where both years we've had a climb up to Caerphilly Castle, summit finish last year, and they're both. That's quite a punchy climb. It's quite similar. It's not as steep as the Mur de Huy or the Coburg, but it's a similar type of climb, and it's exactly the sort of stage that Tiernan-Locke excels on. So he'd be a really interesting choice, and he'd also be someone who maybe might not be watched as closely as some of the bigger names.
Yeah, and he also might be one of these guys who maybe plays a domestique role, but he's one of those guys who might be playing a domestique role and has the opportunity to win. So I really like that. I really like that pick. Kathy, do you have any objections to including Mr. Tiernan-Locke on our team?
None whatsoever.
Okay. All right. So far we need 3 more. We have 5 people right now on our team. We have Philippe Gilbert, Joaquim Rodriguez, Vincenzo Nibali, Alejandro Valverde, and Jonathan Tiernan-Locke. So Tim, I'm gonna ask you to give us another name.
Okay, so I'm looking more now, I guess, at not so much a rider who's necessarily a contender, but someone who would be who would serve as a domestique a little bit more and provide support for the team's top riders. So my choice would be Katusha's Daniel Moreno. We've got a guy who's in his own right. He's a very good punchy climber. He's good enough to have won a stage at the Vuelta in the past. He's better known these days as J-Rod's Mountain Shepherd, but he would be a great guy to have on your team, both as a support and potentially as a fallback, as a plan B.
Yeah, he might be a guy too where I think Joaquim Rodriguez is going to have the opportunity to win a lot this year. And so he might be divvying some spoils maybe during the Ardennes to a guy like Moreno. So I think that's a good pick. Okay, Kathy, I know that you haven't prepared for this, but do you have another name for me?
I have actually prepared this name.
Okay. What do you got?
Jens Voigt. Because he is going to be riding a couple of them. I just read on Twitter.
Okay.
And so he could be a domestique role. He could split the peloton apart. He could just put the pain down. Or, who knows? Maybe, I hope this isn't his last year of racing, but wouldn't it be great if he won one of these?
Yeah.
So I'm giving it to Jens.
Okay, so under consideration, we have Moreno and Jens. Okay, I'm going to actually throw 3 names at you. I'm going to throw Alberto Contador, Peter Sagan, and Dan Martin.
Sagan.
Mm-hmm. All right, so we know that Peter decided to take Paris-Roubaix off so that he could actually rest for the Ardennes Classics.
No, he lost the bet.
He's a guy who can handle these punchy climbs. Do we think he could carry, Tim, do you think he could carry this form into, I know he was trying to peak for the cobbled Classics, but could he carry form into the Ardennes Classics?
I think he could, but I think at the same time you've probably identified the biggest problem, which I think he very much has been at his peak for the last 2 or 3 weeks, and maybe it might be asking a little bit too much for him to extend that form just another week or 2 longer.
All right, so maybe not for Sagan. What about Dan Martin, who's had a very good season running up to these and is has shown that he can really turn the screws on these punchy climbing finishes? And then, of course, I picked Alberto Contador because he's Alberto Contador.
Yeah, I read something earlier today, I think, where Contador isn't necessarily... I think he was down to skip Amstel, but to race Flèche Wallonne and Liège. And he's umming and ahhing about whether he's going to do that. And I think he's going to take a decision on that in the next few days. I think if he does decide to ride, he would be a fascinating choice to watch. He'd be very heavily marked, but at the same time, if he's in any kind of form, he would be a really dangerous rider. Dan Martin is an interesting one. He's actually the next name on my list. He was obviously he was the winner in Catalonia.
Yep.
Fantastic ride on the Queen stage to win that, which was what set him up for the overall. And again, one of these riders he's a super talented climber. Who could be a little bit of a dark horse in these races.
Yeah. Okay, so here's what I think I'm going to do. Since he was on your list too, Tim, I'm going to say let's include Dan Martin.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And so let me see here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All right. So between Contador, we got to pick 2 of these guys. Contador, Daniel Moreno, and Jens Voigt. Who do we think are the 2 that we should pick out of those 3?
Gotta be Jens.
All right.
Yeah, I would have Jens and Moreno just to make sure that just to make sure that we've got a good balance of the team.
All right, so there we go. So here's our team. This is going to be interesting because I just have a feeling that we're going to regret not picking Contador, but that's okay. Because I think these are 2 solid picks in Moreno and Voigt.
You're going to regret not picking Cassie.
Right. All right, so we have Philippe Gilbert, Joaquin Rodriguez, Vincenzo Nibali, Alejandro Valverde, Jonathan Tiernan-Locke, Dan Martin, Daniel Moreno, and Jens Voigt. That is our Ardennes Classics team. So we will check next podcast to see how we're doing. All right. That was fun. I think we were much more prepared for the Cobbled Classic squad than we were from the Ardennes Classic squad. Because nobody's talking about the Ardennes. Everybody's so hyped up about this, the Cobbled Classics that we're not quite ready to talk about the Ardennes. So I think VeloVoices, we're setting a trend with talking about the Ardennes this early. Okay, Tim, tell us what's happening in the next 2 weeks.
Right. Well, the highlight of the next fortnight, of course, as we've just been talking about, is Ardennes week. So that brings us Amstel Gold and Liège-Bastogne-Liège on consecutive Sundays, with Flèche Wallonne as a tasty little midweek treat in between. Historically, Philippe Gilbert ran the table in 2011. And last year provided us with a bit more of an eclectic set of winners. So, actually, Astana are going to be defending the titles at both Amstel and Liège, which last year were won by Enrico Gasparotto and Maxime Iglinski, who we've mentioned already.
Yep.
And then in between, again, we've talked about him already. Joaquim Rodriguez finally won a classic after a succession of second place finishes, and he took on the Mur de Huy as if it wasn't that much more than a small speed bump on his way to victory.
Right. Yeah, he rode away from everybody at the end there. That was awesome.
Yeah. So, but before we even reach the Ardennes, this coming Wednesday we have the what I describe as the lumpy as anything Brabantse Peel.
Yeah.
If you pronounce. It was 28 hills last year. Thomas Verkler attacked 32 kilometres out and nobody ever saw him again. This year, much easier. Just the 25 climbs on a 200 kilometre parkour, and basically the final 100k has a climb every 5 kilometres. It is a puncher's delight, and it is a race for absolute madmen. So Verkler again then.
Well, yeah, and you know what? He's one that we didn't pick for our Ardennes team, so that'll be interesting too to watch him school everybody that we picked.
Yeah, and Tommy has previous. He was fifth at Amstel last year. He was fourth at Liège. So you never know.
Yeah.
You never know. But then, as we say goodbye to the Spring Classic season, we've then got a couple of non-World Tour stage races to look forward to. There's the 4-day Giro del Trentino, which starts a week on Tuesday. And if I read out last year's top three, it's not difficult to work out what type of race this is. So it was won by Domenico Pozzovivo, with Damiano Cunego second and Sylvester Schmidt third. It's a climbers race.
Yeah.
And then there's the Tour of Turkey, which is not a climbers race. That starts in 2 weeks' time, Sunday the 21st. That essentially is all about the sprinters. So stage winners last year included Theo Boss, Andre Greipel, Sacha Modolo, and Mark Renshaw. Notable because it was his only win of the season, I think.
Yeah.
And seeing as we mentioned it before, there was a stage win by Iljo Kaiser.
Yes.
Which was one of our favourite wins ever, wasn't it?
Absolutely.
Brilliant finish. People, if you have not seen the finish at the Tour of Turkey where Ilo Kaiser drops a chain, you need to go on YouTube right now and look that up because it's one of the best finishes ever. Okay, and speaking of finishes, we have now reached our sprint finish. And, okay, so I'm going to ask the first question today. It is from Anthony, and his Twitter handle is @RexGlobetrotter. And Tim, I'm going to ask you this question. He says, "It pains me to say this, but Tyler Farah has lost his top gear. Is he still a sprinter, or does he need to change as a rider to someone like Simon Gerrans?"
Okay, I always get the multi-part questions, don't I?
Right.
Tyler Farah. I mean, there's no question that the guy's a talented bike rider, but his problem for me has always been that he is neither fish nor fowl. And by that I mean that he doesn't have the pure out-and-out speed of a Cavendish or a Greipel to be a consistent winner in the bunch sprints, and he doesn't really have the ability to power up the climbs like someone like Peter Sagan or Simon Gerrans. So he can't really dominate on either terrain. I'm not so sure he's lost the gear. I don't think he's any slower than he was, but I do think that firstly he's in a team that doesn't always have a particularly effective sprint train, and more importantly, the sprint field definitely is much deeper than it was even 2 years ago. I mean, it used to be all about Cavan HTC and then just a small handful of others like Alessandro Patacchi. But if you look at what's happened since then, you've had HTC High Road alone has spawned Greipel, Goss, John Degenkolb, all of whom are faster than Farah. Plus, there's that fella Sagan. He's quite useful. And then there's a rich crop of youngsters who we often refer to. So Kittel,
Ferrari,
Brian Cockard, Europcar, Arnaud Demar, Andrea Guardini, Barry Marcus, who I've mentioned already, and others. And it's kind of easy to see that Farah really he's gone backwards just by standing still. So can he reinvent himself as maybe a Simon Gerrans type rider? Maybe, but I don't think so.
Good answer. All right, why don't you ask the next question?
Okay, right. I think we will ask Kathy this question. So this one's from Derek Troy, or at Flamcast on Twitter. And he's asking, really, Tom Bonin, did he just wimp out of the Spring Classic season?
This is a bit of a sore spot for me because you know how I love Tom and his magnificent Boonans. I would say that at first he had very good reason to maybe not get the results because of everything that had happened with this infected elbow and things like that. But then the unfortunate crash in Flanders, there was some speculation as to that he just didn't have it in him, so when he crashed he didn't even try to get up. And then he put his sunglasses on to get into the ambulance. So, do you know what? I think... I don't think he wimped out, but I just don't think his heart was in it after a while.
Yeah, the guy has a broken rib. Come on.
Yeah.
He's got broken bones. I don't think he wimped out, but surely luck wasn't on his side. Okay, Kathy, I guess that means that you're asking me the final question.
Okay, this is from Facebook, and it's from Irvin Smith. Since Contador's points don't count for the team for 2 years, shouldn't Saxo be trying to get others to gain points in these smaller World Tour races?
Okay.
What do you think?
I don't know the answer to this question, and the reason I don't know the answer is because nobody understands the UCI World Points system. If you go on UCI's website right now, it says that Alberto Contador has earned Saxo 126 points. So do those points count or not? I don't know the answer to this question. I think the real answer is no, they should still keep racing for Contador because Saxo Tinkoff is their sponsor, and the sponsors want to see people win. And in order to qualify for the World Tour, you have to have good sponsors and good money behind you. So absolutely not. Contador should be their man, and he's going to be their man through the Grand Tours and the rest of the year. So there you go. All right. Hey, Tim, I think tonight you win the sprint finish because I think you named every sprinter in the peloton.
Can I have a cobble for that?
Yeah, you can. I hear you can buy little mini cobbles in the gift shops near Roubaix. So, all right, everybody, I just want to thank you so much for... first of all, giving us feedback on the podcast. We're glad that some of you are listening, and we hope that others will start to listen. But also for contributing to these sprint finish questions. It's nice to, have more than a handful of questions to have to answer every week. So thank you so much. Tim and Kathy, it has been an exhilarating 2 weeks with these cobbled classics.
Yes.
It's been thrilling, and what a great way to finish, on Paris-Roubaix Day with this glorious podcast. Everybody, thank you for joining us. We're going to bid you good night. Make sure you follow us on Facebook at Facebook/VeloVoices. Make sure you follow us on Twitter at VeloVoices. And obviously, make sure you read our musings on the blog at VeloVoices.com. You guys have a good night, and we'll talk to you after the Ardennes Classics.
Okay.
Good night.
Night.
Good night.
VeloVoices. Many voices. One passion. Pro cycling. For fans. By fans.